Welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going back to the 18th century, and we're going to be looking at Aaron Burr. Of course, Chris, when we think of Aaron Burr, I think everybody knows him as the guy who shot Alexander Hamilton. And we do want to deal with that in the next episode. In this episode of History You Didn't Know But Should, we want to look really at his early life and the so-called Burr Conspiracy.
Yeah, you know, Ray, the story of Aaron Burr is probably one of the most troubling in all of the history of the United States. We always talk about these founding fathers, and we talk about the great things that they did, but you know, when you come and talk about Aaron Burr, many people know him from the Broadway show Hamilton. They might know of him through the great Duel. But really, he's one of the fallen founders, if you will. Here's a man who was talented, educated, well-connected. He was courageous. Probably could have been president of the United States. Destined to help lead a new nation. To be with the pillars of Washington and Adams and Jefferson. And he lost it all. And he has fallen away to obscurity. And if it hadn't been for the rise of Hamilton, we probably wouldn't know much about Burr.
Yeah, Burr he's I guess you could say, Chris, he's an example of someone who greed and arrogance maybe just took him out. You know?
But I would also say, and this is what I look forward to us talking about, is how history is going to paint an individual. And some people will look at just one aspect of an individual's life instead of looking at the complete life. And I think what we'll find to be interesting is that most of history has painted Aaron Burr as what could have been and doesn't focus on some of the good things that he actually does. And we'll get into that as we talk about him.
Now, when we look at Burr's early life, I think there are several things there that are very interesting to me, Chris. One is he's born in 1756 there in Newark, New Jersey. He is the son of a guy called Aaron Burr Sr. Now, Aaron Burr Sr. is very interesting because, number one, he is the grandson of Great Awakening theologian Jonathan Edwards, which makes, of course, Aaron Burr the great-grandson of Jonathan Edwards. But number two, Aaron Burr Sr. was the second president of Princeton University. So, you know, Chris, when we think about Aaron Burr, this man has a really strong pedigree. Here you have a man who's in his lineage was Jonathan Edwards from the Great Awakening.
Yeah, not only do you have this great lineage, but he comes along and is destined to follow in the paths of his father and his grandfather in being a Protestant minister. That's his goal. That's his path. And what's interesting is Aaron Burr was extremely intelligent. Now, Ray, that's something that we definitely do not have in common with Aaron Burr, because at the age of 11, Aaron Burr thought so highly of himself in his educational pedigree that he applied to Princeton University. When you think about that, at 11 years old and applying to one of the most prestigious universities in America.
He's not known for his humility.
No. And Princeton, though, did want to humble him a little bit, and at the age of 11 said, no, we appreciate your application, but no, you're not coming. And so what does Aaron Burr do? At the age of 13, he reapplies. And he says, listen, I want to come in, and not only do I want to come in, but I should come in as a junior because you rejected me when I was 11. And at this time, Princeton, who, remember, the second president of Princeton, the third president of Princeton, they're all family members, right? So at the age of 13, Princeton agrees to enroll Aaron Burr as a student. They say you can't come in as a junior. We'll bring you in as a sophomore, and he will graduate from Princeton at the age of 16 with honors, and he's moving forward into divinity school, and then he just has this realization that maybe it's just not religion I'm interested in, but law and politics.
Yeah, I don't think he had the personality for religion. I mean, I think if someone's going to be a religious leader, they need a little humility, which Aaron Burr did not have. Right. You know, not to bash Aaron Burr, just saying, you know. He's going to begin his military service in 1775 as a volunteer. He's going to serve under men such as Benedict Arnold. He's actually going to join the staff of with George Washington in 1776. But he and Washington apparently don't get along very well, which is certainly understandable. So he's only with Washington a few weeks before becoming aide-de-camp to General Israel Putnam. And eventually he's going to see action there at the Battle of Long Island and the evacuation of New York there during the American Revolution. At the famous Valley Forge winter in 1777 and 1778, he's there. He comes out of that, and he's involved in the June 19, 1778 battle there at Monmouth, New Jersey, Monmouth Courthouse, where Washington, of course, if you remember your history here, had put General Charles Lee in charge of the army, and Lee just absolutely bungled this battle. And of course, George Washington came in and took over there.
And Ray, we spend so much time talking about the negative aspect of Burr, but yet there are some redeeming qualities about him, if you will. I mean, he, along with many other students who were studying at the university when the American Revolution broke out, he decided to put his studies on hold, and he found it interesting to go forth and to fight in the war. It's interesting, once again, he was part of Benedict Arnold, that people will know about being a traitor, yet his valor, his demonstrations in the field wins him respect and also titles. And, he gets placed on George Washington's staff, as you mentioned. Now, it's interesting that he doesn't last long in service with Washington, and it seems that maybe it was because he wanted to be back in the field. He wanted to be fighting instead of doing correspondence or whatever it might be. But, Washington, some scholars say, believe that Burr was reading his private letters and was disseminating that information, and so Washington didn't trust him and wanted him away. But whatever happens, it is very clear that Burr develops a reputation as a good officer. People respect him. People follow him. He sleeps with them out in the cold. He is right there in the middle of the battle. And he takes great pride. Here's that humility thing again that he's lacking. But, for a long time after the war, Aaron Burr doesn't want to be known as Aaron. He wants to be known as Colonel Burr.
Yeah, he's going to stay in the war until March of 1779, when he's going to resign from the army, citing ill health. He's going to go back to school to study law. And in 1782, he's going to marry a lady called Theodosia Bartow Prevost. Now, that name may sound a little familiar because they're going to have one daughter. A daughter, Theodosia Burr. We did an episode on Theodosia earlier in our series, first season of our podcast series. Of course, she died off the coast of North Carolina, or disappeared off the coast of North Carolina, maybe presumed dead.
And, one of the things, once again, I think that people back in the day could have drawn some negativity towards Aaron Burr is the fact that he falls in love with this widow of a British Army officer. That could play a huge role in how the legacy of Aaron Burr starts out, because, of course, the British were not, on good terms with America during this particular point. She's 10 years older than he is. And so there's this opportunity for individuals to start looking for things about Aaron Burr. Is he really a founder? Is he really a patriot? Is he really fully supporting America's views? Simply because of who he chose to be in a relationship with. But the other thing that goes with that is Burr didn't talk a lot. No. He was a lawyer, and, he could have been a preacher, but, you have Hamilton, who has written all of these letters and documents. You got Jefferson, who has written, and all of these people are very verbose about pushing their agenda and, detailing what they believe. But Aaron Burr remains quiet, and I think that goes against him as well, because by all accounts, from what we hear from Theodosia, his wife, but also Theodosia, his daughter, and for others who were close, Aaron Burr was charming. He was generous. He was brilliant, and he was also a little mysterious.
Yeah, and we mentioned in our earlier episode that he and Theodosia, the daughter, had a very good relationship, even though they lived quite a distance away from each other. She was living in South Carolina, and he was still up north. He and his wife are going to remain married for about 12 years before she passes away. But in the meantime, Aaron Burr is a very successful attorney. In 1783, he's going to move to New York. And believe it or not, you know who he's going to share a law practice with?
Let me guess. What's your name, man?
Alexander Hamilton. I don't know. Did I do that right?
You did that right.
I did that right.
Nice
Okay.
job.
I haven't. Chris, for those of you listening, Chris has seen Hamilton. I have not. So I have to depend on Chris for our Hamilton references here. But he's going to move there to New York. He's going to share a law practice with Alexander Hamilton. And we'll talk about the duel and what led up to the duel between Hamilton and Burr in our next episode. In 1789, New York Governor George Clinton is going to call on Aaron Burr to be Attorney General of New York, and that, of course, is going to begin his political career. In 1791, he's going to be elected to the United States Senate, and in being elected to the United States Senate, he's actually going to defeat an incumbent senator named General Philip Schuyler, who happened to be the father-in-law of Alexander Hamilton. And, of course, that may have helped bring about some of the tension between Hamilton and Duel. He's going to serve 6 years in the United States Senate. And in 1796 and in 1800, Chris, here comes that humility of Burr we keep talking about. He's going to run for president of the United States. Now, when we talk about running for president of the United States in the late 18th century, you didn't get out there with your campaign slogan and your signs and your songs. Instead, what happened was your friends, your relatives, your associates went out there and campaigned for you. Letter writing campaigns, speeches, and things like that, while you sort of sat on the sideline and I guess you were supposed to feign disinterest, you know.
Yeah, public office was considered a duty, and you accepted it as a service to people, and yet here you have Aaron Burr start coming around, and he's actively campaigning, and people are looking around like, dude, that's not what you do.
Yeah.
This is not how you're supposed to act. And Burr continues to prove time and time again he doesn't care how things are. He doesn't care about tradition. But here's the problem. The problem is that while we see this, that he doesn't care, he never explains or defends his actions, which I think kind of goes against him. And so, whatever the public thinks of campaigning and how it should work out, the reality is that it's pretty fascinating that in this first contest that Aaron Burr finishes fourth, right? He gets 30 votes. So with someone who has a very short political career, who's not out there in the papers, who's really not got the accomplishments as a Jefferson or an Adams, it's pretty impressive him coming away with 30 votes, and he returns to New York to get back into the law and to resume his practice, but he still has eyes on the biggest prize, to the point where I believe Governor Clinton offered him a spot on the New York Supreme Court, and Aaron Burr said, thanks, but no thanks. I have bigger fish that I'm going after.
Yeah, he wants the presidency, and he's going to come very close to being president in the election of 1800. He is going to tie with Thomas Jefferson with 73 electoral votes in the Electoral College. Now, I think there had been an assumption among many Democratic Republicans, which was the party they belonged to, that sort of Burr would get the vice presidency, Jefferson would get the presidency. And when they tied, I think there was a lot of hope that Burr would somehow step aside. But as we've been saying, Chris, this is not a humble man. This is not the kind of guy who's just going to step aside. So he holds on, and it takes a little while for Thomas Jefferson to actually be declared the President of the United States in a tie-breaking vote in the House of Representatives. And the way it was set up back then, if you came in second in the Electoral College, you were vice president. If you came in first, you were president. So guess who's going to be Thomas Jefferson's vice president? The guy who just refused to step aside in a disputed election result in the Electoral College. Now Aaron Burr, is going to be Thomas Jefferson's vice president. And Jefferson and Burr, Jefferson never really sets that aside. They are never really close, and they don't like each other that much.
And let's be real here that what really causes Aaron Burr to finish second and to receive vice president and not president comes about because of one man, and that is Alexander Hamilton. This is not a Hamilton podcast, but it needs to be stated, Alexander Hamilton didn't like Aaron Burr.
And vice versa.
And vice versa. You're absolutely right. And you can go back to the Schuler election. You can go back to there. But Hamilton and Burr just didn't like each other. They just had a bad taste of each other. But Alexander Hamilton hated Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
Couldn't stand him. Nothing good about Thomas Jefferson, according to Alexander Hamilton. But Hamilton swings enough votes,
yes, he does,
to go in favor of the guy that he hates instead of the guy that he doesn't like in Aaron Burr. And, Alexander Hamilton felt that he had more personal convictions than Aaron Burr. He basically said, hey, the guy's bold, he's enterprising, he can do a lot of things, but Hamilton says, quote, I feel it is a religious duty to oppose his career. Now, when you say it's my religious duty to do something, I mean, that's basically invoking that God has told me that I have got to do everything I can to keep you from being president, even if that means to swing all of the votes to the man that I hate more than anybody on the face of this earth. And Burr wound up as vice president. However, what happens is Jefferson can't trust Burr because he wouldn't step aside. Hamilton doesn't like Burr. And so you're going to have this three-way contest of just anger and just hatred and vitriol that's going to come out between Burr, Hamilton, and Jefferson, to which Jefferson gives the brilliant Senator Burr basically no responsibilities as vice president.
Right.
You can have the title, but I'm not asking you to do anything.
And then, of course, in July of 1804, there's the famous duel, which we're going to talk about in our next episode, between Hamilton and Burr. And we'll talk about this more in the next episode as well. Burr's going to continue to serve as vice president until March of 1805. He's going to serve out his term as vice president, despite the fact that he killed Alexander Hamilton in an illegal duel. So he's going to stay there in the vice presidency for that last year. And then it's when he's leaving the vice presidency, Chris, that he gets involved in some very strange stuff. And some of these things may have actually gone back to before, some of his ideas here may have actually gone back to before the Hamilton and Burr duel. But Burr looks west, and he looks at the territory of Louisiana, which, of course, at this point, I don't believe it had been bought in the United States yet. And he looks west to the land of to the territory of Louisiana, and he says, hey, man, there's an opportunity for me out there. There may not be an opportunity for me on the East Coast anymore, in the United States anymore, but there may be an opportunity for me out there in Louisiana.
And he had a lot of friends that supported him with that initiative also. I mean, we have to understand, this is not just Aaron Burr going out on his own thinking, okay, I'll take these 40,000 acres and I'll just hold on to it and just have my own little land. He had people from his American Revolution days.
Right.
He had individuals that were classmates from when he was at the university, and they believed in Aaron Burr, which just have to think through. Here is a man who has now been exiled. His political career is ruined. His reputation is destroyed. He is no longer the vice president, but yet there are people who still believe in the guy and are willing to entertain the possibility of him claiming some land for, I don't know, some purposes that are still debatable, but what many people think is breaking away from the United States so he could officially claim his title as president.
Yeah, creating his own empire and sort of setting himself up there in charge. And you talk about some of these friends he had. One of them was a guy called General James Wilkinson, who was a pretty important person in the U.S. Army. He's one of the guys that teams up with Aaron Burr on this idea. But ultimately, he's also the guy that turns Aaron Burr in, that gets Aaron Burr in trouble. But Aaron Burr and Wilkinson and these others, they move west. Burr goes west on a reconnaissance mission shortly after leaving the vice presidency. He goes into these towns and he basically starts talking about what he's doing. Little hint there, if you're going to plan this type of activity, maybe you don't need to tell everybody about it, right?
Right.
But that's what he does. Actually, before he even left the vice presidency, he had contacted a British person, a British guy named Anthony Merry, who was Britain's foreign minister to the United States, basically telling them, I would like your support, or requesting their support, and Britain's never going to come through with such support. They're just never going to do it. It's never going to arrive. But Burr's going to continue, despite any obstacles that come his way, despite any roadblocks. He is just going to keep pushing and pushing, trying to have this vision of this empire with him in charge go through. During this time, you're going to have a border conflict rise up with Spain. And this, of course, is exactly what Burr wanted. He wants him and Wilkinson to take U.S. troops and attack Texas or Mexico. And basically this would allow him to claim this territory and become emperor of his new empire.
Yeah, and, we're talking about the duel next time, but many people saw what he did with Alexander Hamilton, that he was now a murderer. And that he had done this horrific thing. And so here you have, and Thomas Jefferson now in his mind, first of all, Thomas Jefferson can't stand Aaron Burr. I mean, that's number one, previous things. But now you have this madman that is on the loose in America who is compiling a group of benefactors and contributors, and there is the very real threat that Aaron Burr could be setting up a coup or an independent America. And Thomas Jefferson basically has to do something to control this guy. Mm-hmm. He's got to stop it, because if he doesn't stop it, there's no telling what's going to happen, because we have a lot of domestic issues as well as international issues that are going on outside of this character assassination that's taking place with Burr and Hamilton and Jefferson. And so basically what happens is Jefferson goes all out, accuses Burr of committing treason against the United States of America, and there's this huge trial.
Yeah.
And, I mean, all kinds of things that's being talked about, this smear campaign. I mean, Jefferson is adamant. And, Chief Justice John Marshall, I mean, one of the greatest leaders of the Supreme Court. I mean, here he is, John Marshall, who is presiding over the trial, if you will. And Ray, it takes a while to have this trial, but at the end of the trial, they find him
not guilty. And the reason they didn't find him guilty basically had to do with the way Chief Justice John Marshall was defining treason. I mean, he defined it very narrowly, and technically, I guess in that definition, Burr hadn't committed treason. He was just going off trying to do his own thing. So, of course, this trial showed, at the end of this trial, Burr is acquitted of treason. By the way, he's never officially charged, or he's never held accountable for his murder of Alexander Hamilton. Right. But he becomes grossly unpopular, Chris. People are burning his image in effigy. He is very unpopular, and he is going to flee to Europe to get away from the damage that has been done to his reputation.
Yeah, and he spends some time over in England, actually, and he does some traveling, and he's trying to rebuild his reputation. He's trying to build up the fortune, getting some money, because he is extremely in debt from everything that has occurred. But there's one thing.
And by the way, he's extremely in debt because not only was this one treason trial, there were some other trials that he had faced as well that we didn't talk about.
Right.
That, of course, are going to drain his resources, trying to get this plan together, drain his resources. So by the time he's over in Europe, Chris, like you said, he's not a wealthy man.
He's not, and the only thing that he has that's going for him is, once again, Theodosia. That is the one thing that sticks with him. She has not left his side. even though he is a murderer, he is bankrupt, he is persona non grata, nobody likes him, nobody cares anything for him, you have Theodosia, who continues to want to try to work with him. And after spending some years in Europe, Burr actually wants to return to the United States, and he's going to plan on meeting Theodosia. But unfortunately, Burr...
he can't afford the trip back.
Yeah.
He has to basically, hop on a French ship in 1811. And of course, that was captured by the British. And so he's there until 1812. And it's only after that he's actually able to get back to New York and pick up his law practice.
Yeah, and he picks up his law practice. And what else does he pick up? He picks up a rich widow.
Yeah.
And he marries her, and
he's going to marry her, a lady called Eliza Jumel.
Yeah.
I guess I'm pronouncing that name right. And it's interesting, they stay married until she realizes what?
he's taking all of her money.
He's a bum.
That's right. Squanders all the wealth in like months.
Yeah.
I mean, they're only married for 4 months.
Yeah, they separate after 4 months because he's draining her dry. She had a inheritance, not an inheritance, but her previous husband, Stephen Jamel, had been a land speculator, and he had built up a good size savings, and Burr was going through it like nobody's business. So she's like, no, I got to get out of this. So it's interesting. It says here, during the month of their first anniversary, she sued for divorce.
And the sad truth is that the divorce became final on the day that he
died.
The day that he dies.
That's an interesting end to the life of Aaron Burr.
But I think, Ray, and I mean, I guess because I've studied Hamilton, you've studied Hamilton, seen the show Hamilton, which, the show Hamilton really portrays Aaron Burr as kind of how we've portrayed him.
Right.
And I don't think we can end the podcast that way. I think we've got to try to redeem Aaron Burr if I can.
Yeah, we're not going to do it in the next episode, so we might as well do it here.
Because the next episode is all about the duel, and there's no redeeming quality about that. I can't redeem that. But it is important that during his political career, that maybe we step back and look at Aaron Burr in a different context. And I think that it's important to understand that Aaron Burr did really try to help the middle class and the lower class. Alexander Hamilton came from the upper class. But, he had his struggles, but eventually he made his way into money and things of that nature. But, when you look at Aaron Burr, he extends credit to a middle class by helping open up the Bank of New York. He fought for an electoral system that would give power to all people and not just to the rich people. But here's the other thing. Aaron Burr, who was a slaveholder, actually didn't advocate for slavery. He was against slavery. He pushed for emancipation, but it wasn't just gradual abolition, but he wanted immediate emancipation, even though that meant he was going to have to give up his slaves. He was willing to do that because he believed that all people had a right to freedom. The other thing I would say is that Alexander Hamilton... not Alexander Hamilton, sorry, he was in my head.
Burr.
Aaron Burr, sorry. But another thing about Aaron Burr is the respect that he had for women. Now, he was a player. I mean, that's got to be out there. But he's the only one of the founding fathers who truly believed wholeheartedly that women were just as equal as men. We saw that in Theodosia. I mean, my gosh, by the age of 10, she was able to translate Latin and Greek, and Burr actually said, I hope it's through my daughter that people will see that women have souls. The other thing about Aaron Burr is he loved his wife.
Yeah.
Alexander Hamilton's a story of betrayal and debauchery and all of these horrible things. He humiliates his wife.
The first sex scandal in American political history is Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah. And I mean, he humiliates her. Mm-hmm. But when we talk about Burr, he married for love.
Yeah.
He truly loved the first time. Now, the other time he married for money.
Yeah.
That it kind of destroys the point there. But the first time, he really did love her.
Yeah.
And he was an outsider. And the only thing that I wish that Aaron Burr would have done is I wish he would have defended himself. And Ray, there's so many lessons that you and I can learn from that, because Hamilton had so much to say about himself. Jefferson, though he wouldn't speak it, he would write it. I mean, so much information. And if Burr would have thought about legacy, if he would have thought about the future, I think we might be engaging in a different conversation about Burr. You know, I'll share this quote and then I'm done, but Burr said this. He said, quote, "I fear I have committed a great error. The men who knew their falsity are dead, and the generation who now read them may take them for truths, being uncontradicted. I admit I have committed a capital error, but it is too late to repair it." You see, Burr's family had gone on and passed before he really passed away, and nobody was there to carry forth his legacy. His letters, his journals were destroyed in a ship that sunk, and some other tragedies. But if only he would have spoken up, Ray.
The winners tell the story.
Yeah.
The winners tell the history. Well, I hope our listeners, Chris, have enjoyed this episode on Aaron Burr. Like we said, we'll have at least one more episode on him. And if you haven't heard the episode on his daughter, the Adosia Burr, we hope you will go back and listen to that. Please share this podcast with your friends. We're on Facebook, Sounder FM, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcast. We're on all of those places. Please share the episode, like it, and tell your friends about it. Until next time, I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.